Hello class, today we're going to be discussing World War II, the Pacific Theater. Now whenever we're talking about the Pacific Theater, what events or things occurred during this time period? Yes.
Attack on Pearl Harbor.
The attack on Pearl Harbor, yes, whenever the Japanese attacked Hawaii, causing the United States to end their neutrality and enter the war against Japan, which also in turn would cause them to be declared war on by Hitler and the Nazis. What else? Yes.
The Manhattan Project.
The Manhattan Project, yes. Good point to bring up. The Manhattan Project is where we developed the atomic bombs, and we will end up dropping them on the key points in Japan, which would eventually lead to their surrender and would eventually get us to switch our attention over to Hitler and the German front whenever later on in the war. Before the U.S. entered the war, the Japanese wanted to expand to the Dutch East Indies to find resources, but being an island, Japan has to import most, if not all, of its resources. Alright, now Japan has to import everything into it, being an island. What could be a possible problem with all the goods that are coming in? What would Japan have to do to get all these goods in the country? Yes.
Pay taxes.
Yes, they would have to pay taxes on all of their goods. Other word for this would be a tariff. They would have import tariffs, which are higher in price, and they would have to end up paying for that on top of the price of the item for which they would be importing into their country. Franklin D. Roosevelt wanted to prevent this from happening and threatened to close off U.S. trade with Japan and place an embargo on them if they invaded the Dutch East Indies. Yes.
What's an embargo?
An embargo is what the United States placed on Japan, basically limiting any and all trade between the United States and Japan. They wanted to try and expand it further out, but for this embargo, it focused primarily on any and all trade from the U.S. to Japan is completely limited and back and forth. The Day of Infamy. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The attack waves were launched by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto and Admiral Osamu Nagano. They sent 2 waves of bombers that destroyed most of the U.S. fleet, which were the destroyers that were stationed there at the time. They would have sent a 3rd wave, but their main objective, the aircraft carriers, were not present during their attack. So they ended up calling them off. Yes?
What is an aircraft carrier?
Great question. Here is an image of what an aircraft carrier compared to a destroyer looks like. On this slide, you can see on the left side is a destroyer at Pearl Harbor being bombed by the Japanese. On the right side of it is the aircraft carrier. You can note that it's an aircraft carrier with all the jets lined up on it. Basically, the destroyer has most of the cannons on it and other turrets, and the aircraft carrier itself has the runway with all the jets on it to be able to shoot all of the planes off of the runway so that they can go into battle much more efficiently. After the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt demanded Congress to vote to declare war on Japan. The United States could not declare a war immediately due to our current government setup. We have to vote in order to go to war. Until the events of Pearl Harbor occurred, the United States wanted to stay in the form of neutrality. Basically, they don't want to get involved. They wanted everyone else to be able to solve it on their own. But once the Japanese came in and started bombing our destroyers in Hawaii, we quickly had to look the other way. Couldn't look the other way anymore, and we went ahead and declared war. So on December the 8th, 1941, the United States declared war on Japan, and shortly after we declared war on Japan, Hitler would declare war on the United States. You have any questions so far? Yes?
Why did Hitler declare war on the United States?
Great question. Hitler declared war on the United States because Japan was one of its allies. The breakdown of the alliances was German, Italy, Japan on one side, which was the Axis powers, and then you have the Allied powers, which would be comprised of Britain, France, Soviet Union, and the United States once we entered the war? Great question. Meanwhile, in the Philippines, the Battle of Bataan occurred beginning in January 1942. It was fought on Luzon, a small island in the Philippines. It was the greatest defeat of military forces. The American and Filipino armies, led by General MacArthur, forces fought well but were forced to retreat. But MacArthur would vow that he would return to the Philippines. As a result, there was the Bataan Death March. It was a 12-day march from April 10th to the 22nd of 1942. From the Battle of Bataan, the Japanese took 76,000 American and Filipino prisoners and basically ran them 12 days constantly. And basically, if they dropped or fell behind, they would be shot and killed. The actual death toll from the Bataan Death March is still unknown to this day. The Doolittle Raid occurred on April 18, 1942. This was led by Jimmy Doolittle. 16 B-25 bombers took off from the aircraft carrier Hornet, bound for Japan. They ended up bombing Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, and then headed into China. Japan had no idea where these bombers came from. Now, class, do you have any idea why it would catch the Japanese off guard?
I don't know.
Alright, kind of expected that response. The B-25 bombers are not bombers that are meant to be taken off from anywhere out at sea. They're supposed to be taking off from a base on an island with long enough runway. Surprisingly, these were modified slightly, and they were able to take off from an aircraft carrier and attacked the Japanese from the ocean side of their country, when these bombers normally would come over from either the China part or one of the other outlying islands and be able to bomb them. And if they did in that case, the Japanese probably would have had some anti-aircraft countermeasures ready for them to prevent this attack from happening. So in the long run, the attack came from the ocean with bombers that should have been coming from land. The battle at Coral Sea was fought from May 7th to May 8th of 1942. It was an unplanned aerial battle. Japan may have won this fight, but they ended up taking heavy losses. It involved the aircraft carriers that were not present at Pearl Harbor. The aircraft carriers would end up becoming the key weapon of the Pacific theater for the United States. The battle at Coral Sea, as the slide stated, really the aircraft carriers and Japan naval forces, they ran into each other, and a battle ensued between the two. The United States did suffer hefty losses in this fight, but so did the Japanese, even though they were declared the victors out of it, because they managed to get away a little better than how the United States did. But it would introduce, as the slide also mentioned, the aircraft carrier would be the main weapon the United States would be using to launch its attacks, which would bring in the term island hopping that we will discuss next time, so that the United States is able to launch their forces out while moving along islands to get better strategic points against Japan. Alright, now that we're running low on class time, let's go ahead and review a little bit. What is another term for the Day of Infamy? Yes.
The attack on Pearl Harbor.
Yes, the attack on Pearl Harbor, where the Japanese launched 2 waves of aircraft against the United States, destroying most of their battleships and causing the United States to end their neutrality and enter World War II. Now, what would end up being the key weapon of the Pacific theater? Yes.
Aircraft carrier.
Correct, the aircraft carrier. You have all your aircraft on a ship with a runway, and you're able to shoot them off into battle or out to surveillance the area to get more reports. Now, the other thing is relating to the aircraft carrier. How did the Doolittle Raid, using the aircraft carrier, confuse the Japanese?
We use land-based carriers.
not carriers, land-based planes.
Planes.
That was close. The land-based planes were launched from the aircraft carrier in the ocean and bombed the Japanese and landed safely in China. And since they were B-25s, the Japanese are like, these are land-based planes. What are they doing coming from the ocean? Now, tomorrow we'll be picking up even further. We'll introduce some more people, such as Admiral Steve Nimitz, General MacArthur making his return to the Philippines, and then leading up to the Manhattan Project and the end of the World War II Pacific Theater. And after that, the United States will be getting into the war with Hitler in Germany, in Europe. Thanks for watching this video, and have a great day. And these are the references used for this video. And one last note, Jennifer Smith Fritzy was the audience member and partial video camera filmer other than myself.